So I want to talk about the third noble truth, which I absolutely would say is, um, well, none of us are going to think of anything more wonderful than that. That's, if you're going to think of good news to express to others, the third noble truth is the Buddha's statement that there can be an end to suffering. That is, and he also said, uh, the most important part of it, is that there could be an end to suffering in this life, now, today. I said just, you remember those of you who were here last week, I went to the symphony with a friend and she forgot her keys to her, she left the keys to her car in the car. And so we were getting to Sibelius and she looked at me and she said, oh, she said, I just realized I left my keys in the car. So she took the almost the first beginner's course. So, anyway, long story short, she didn't do anything and I didn't do anything, and we listened to the Sibelius, and we were walking back to the car, and I said, so how did you do with that? She said, I put it out of my mind. She said, that's what I've learned from meditation. That was an example of not suffering, right? It's a little example of not suffering. It didn't ruin the symphony for her. She had the ability to put that away momentarily, and it was too late to do anything about it. So she enjoyed the last symphony, and thought that it was great. I thought it was a wonderful little example of how you can have moments of not suffering, The thing that the Buddha suggested, which is so radical you can't get your mind around it, is that you can end it. So I think that in those of us who are from the West, and there'll be a few of you here who are from the West, those of us who are children of the West, I think mostly we read what he said as you can reduce suffering, right? You meditate, and like maybe go to the forest refuge as Jane did for 11 months. You're going to reduce your suffering. I think that's our mindset, isn't it? Wow, I could do this. As my friend did, as Sue did, right? She reduced her suffering. She had enough mind control as a result of meditation, Raul. She had enough mind control to just put that away, and what was her object? Her object was the music, right? And so she had this ability to to pay attention to the music, and that's actually substitution is actually a technique in Buddhism, but not that she was thinking that. She doesn't think that much. So anyway, I think that we interpret it as you can reduce your suffering, which is not a bad thing. But that's not what he said. That's not what he meant. He said something that was just astoundingly radical. He said you can end it. So I want to talk about that today a little bit, and ending suffering. And I don't know exactly how. I guess the way I would get into it is to go back and be a little bit more specific about the cause of it, as we did last week. Although we say that, okay, so the the standard thing about the cause of suffering is tanha, or craving. That's actually what the scriptures say. But we know that there's something that precedes craving. If you go through the nidanas, the 12 links, craving comes from feeling. Feeling comes from contact. So you can trace it all the way back. So the first thing, the first cause or condition is ignorance. That's what starts this whole problem. So if you can imagine that there is an end to ignorance, then you can imagine that there's an end to suffering. It's pretty radical, isn't it? Right? I mean, Mary, what do you think? You're going to end ignorance, right? Just wipe it out. So the Buddha, so I think it's important to remember that because we talk about craving, will lead us to clinging, and clinging will lead us to suffering. But it is the elimination not of craving that would end suffering. It's the elimination of this fundamental core ignorance. Some of you have more of it than others. Taryn, so it's really important to get that. So if we understand what he meant by ignorance, we're on the road. We're on the road. And I think that's where I want us to begin. So, Lisa and Rob would remember that I used to play that organ in this church 10 years ago. While I lacked in technique, I certainly made up for in charisma. Or whatever it is I have, whatever this is. I mean, everyone really loved it. So one Sunday I was, after I had performed, so I'm walking out and down the steps. I'm sure that you all were here that Sunday. So I was walking down the steps, and one very sweet and dear person, I could hear her, coming chasing me as I was almost down the steps. And I turned, and she looked at me, and she said, and she spread her arms out like this, and she said, "You are wonderful." This is rare in my life. It's very rare that it's very rare that I have an instantaneous, intelligent response to anything. But for some reason, I knew the answer to what she said. And as I say, it would be that thing that the Buddha would call spontaneous intuitive wisdom, which he said, you have. You remember I told you he kept saying to Ananda, quit thinking before you talk. He said that over. Quit thinking about what you're going to say and just say it. So I didn't think about what I was going to say. I turned to her and I looked at her and I said, no. I said, you are wonderful. I said, no. I said, it is what is wonderful in you that sees it in me. It took her breath away. I'll never forget it. I mean, she gasped because she actually absolutely got it in that moment, right? I mean, she absolutely got that something in her that was wonderful was seeing something, was just projecting it out onto this. I'm not saying that I'm not wonderful, by the way. It was an amazing moment. I mean, she totally saw the projection. And really, as I said, she gasped. Not long, maybe 2 or 3 years after that, I got an email from someone in this Sangha who told me that I was a seductive, evil teacher who should be reported. And not only, it was really not good. And she said that as a psychotherapist, I am so clever. I know how to manipulate people into doing what I want them to do. And she did say that I was evil. So I thought, well, now, there you go. I mean, I have gone from, I was wonderful, I thought, but it turns out I'm evil. What? Well, that's what I'm talking about. So maybe you know what I'm saying, right? So I want to just suggest to you, as you all look at here, if you look at this, What do you see? What do you see as you look at this? And I would just add to that, what would the Buddha see? Can you imagine what the Buddha would see? Or a Buddha? Maybe we got a couple of you Buddhas in here. What would a Buddha see? What do you see? One person said you're wonderful, one person said you're evil. And they were both wrong. Or maybe they're both right. So, what were we talking? I've forgotten what the topic was. We're talking about what Buddhism means by ignorance, what the Buddha means by ignorance. Not what we consider ignorance to be in the West. I mean, basically, he's ignorant, he has no sense, no knowledge, whatever. So I'm going to suggest to you that, first of all, in your deepest unconscious, the first thing that happens when you look at this is you're processing it unconsciously. You're not even processing it consciously, because that's got to be second. It has to be. So if you go with the 5 skandhas, you process, there's the experience of form, and then after that comes feeling, and after that comes perception. And then after that comes what's called volition. But Buddhism would teach, and maybe mostly Buddhism, that we immediately start transforming what we see into our own set of biases, whatever they are. So you might look at me and you might see your mother, you might see your father, you might see a friend, you might see a lover, you might see someone you hate, you might be somewhat neutral. But it's not possible to not be projecting onto this something that is profoundly unconscious. Now, how many people in this moment, and I mean, I hate to, I'm going to ask you to really, each of you stand up and tell me exactly what you see. How many people are utterly convinced that what you're seeing is reality? Aren't you convinced that what you're seeing? Well, of course, I know what I see, right? That's ignorance. We believe that we see clearly, that what we see, we're absolutely convinced that that's reality. To have this profound state of even awareness, to have this ability to be aware that there is a relentless projection of self. I know that I am real, I have this self, and then we project it out onto the other thing, is according to Buddhism, the beginning of ignorance, but it's not the end of it. It's just the beginning of it. Because then, add to that, we have a discriminating mind, which is on top of all of that unconscious stuff, right? I mean, the discriminating mind is the cognition, is the conscious cognition that divides everything into good and bad, right? And so then that's on top of the unconscious. So, if you are not seeing, if you're distorting, if my cognition is distorted, and if I am relentlessly drawn towards something that I like, and I'm relentlessly trying to push away what I don't like, all coming from what we call a reified self, this sense of there's this solidified entity that is called me, that is it's basically, it's not formed in your conscious mind. I mean, your conscious mind did not create Lisa. That was created, it's basically created unconsciously. If we are relentlessly trying to continue with the idea of making it permanent and also solid, we're bound to suffer. We are bound to suffer because we're not seeing real. We're not being real, and we're not seeing what is real. So the Buddha, if you want to just, I mean, he didn't say it this way, but I think that the truth is, the end of suffering is the ability to see things as they are without putting anything on it at all. Just seeing things as they are. Seeing this as it is without projecting anything onto it, what you want it to be, what you need it to be. Just seeing it as it is. Seeing life as it is. As we say, seeing this body as it is. The impermanence of it. So the Buddha teaches that everything is impermanent. Nothing stays. Nothing lasts. Everything is fleeting. And so if I deny that, if I cannot bear that, if I can't bear the idea that this is really dying. By the way, this morning my tooth broke off. I was very unhappy about that. I was just sitting there thinking about, I was writing, and chewing on something, my tooth broke off. I thought, well, for God's sakes, there you go. A little dose of impermanence right there. And okay, so really, if I cannot bear that this is impermanent, if I just cannot bear that, I can't bear that she's impermanent either. I can't, right? I mean, it's really true. I mean, it's like you've got to be permanent. If I'm permanent, you've got to be permanent, right? So you see, it's not as that we just cling to this self, this distorted view of what this is. You see, then we have to distort that. We have to, and that's called clinging to things. So we cling to self, and we cling to things. In other words, things is everything outside, or things in the mind. If that's not real, right? I mean, if that's not reality, in other words, if there is not something that's permanent, and if there's not anything, if there's no permanent substance, and I am clinging to it relentlessly, what are the odds that I'm going to suffer? How about 100%? So it begins, as I said, with that from, and of course Buddhism teaches, and I'm not one for reincarnation, but well, all right, I'm sorry, Nancy. Nancy is, but you don't have to be for reincarnation to believe that we inherited in our DNA all of these traits of greed, hatred, and delusion. Right? You don't have to believe in a former life at all. I mean, you can, but in other words, this attachment to the idea of a self. I mean, it was in my dog Willie, for God's sakes, in New York City. I loved Willie. But Willie kind of was pretty convinced that he was a self, too. I mean, he wasn't as elevated as I am, of course. I'm a much more elevated. I mean, your cat does. I mean, it's in all sentient nature. What are the chances that you were born, right, with this with a real shot at seeing the emptiness of self? It's in the DNA. So in other words, we start off with this delusion as a tendency, or as I read to you all last week, this brilliant, or the week before, this brilliant statement, right? Our innate disposition to reify. That's the smartest thing. I mean, that's better than metastasized desire. The innate disposition to reify. We were born with that. That means we were born with this innate disposition to nurture the idea that there's a me, and to protect it, and to really work on keeping it, to protect it and keep it safe, and make it as permanent. So here we are now, right? And I remember I wrote. So I look in the mirror, right, and I feel really young. I look in the mirror and I think, God, I feel like I'm 14 years old, and there's this old face. And that works until you're in a nursing home, kids. But the day comes when when they've got the tubes in your arms, right? And you probably say, "Oh, huh? Where's that young person?" Well, it's all the young person that you're seeing in the mirror is actually just a reified. It's a feeling inside that we have reified into a self. That's ignorance, and that is the absolute guarantee of suffering. There's just no way out of it. It's radical, isn't it? I mean, it's just radical because, in other words, if you say to yourself, "Well, hell, I don't want to hold on to myself, and I'd rather just reduce suffering," right? That's what reducing suffering is. Well, Beverly says, "Okay, well, I like me as I am. I'm not going to try to get rid of me." So then we just say, "Okay, so I'm just going to reduce my suffering. I'm going to do that meditation." I mean, maybe that's fine. I don't really have I don't know. I once read at a Dharma talk, and I Googled this, and you can find anything when you Google it. I Googled this, I never found it. I never found any. But when I was in high school, Miss Henry Rogers always came in rather grandly every day, junior in high school, and would write something on the bulletin board. And one day she came in and she wrote this on the blackboard, and so I never forgot it. "Too many people come into this world and know no reason why they're born, save only to consume the corn, the flesh, the fish, and leave behind an empty dish." Oh, my Lord. I wrote it. I never forgot it. It went right in. I never forgot it. "Too many people come into this world and know no reason why they're born, save only to consume the corn, the flesh, the fish, and leave behind an empty dish." Well, now there's somebody who probably is not going to be interested in the end of suffering, right? And I don't mean that really with any sarcasm or unkindness at all. The idea of the Mahayana ideal of the Bodhisattva is that you suspend going into nirvana until all sentient beings are enlightened. Excuse me. That you're just like you're going to be here a long time, aren't you? So I read that too many people come into the world because it is really true that the idea of the idea of aspiring to non-suffering is phenomenal. It's an unbelievable idea. Travis, do you want to reduce suffering or end suffering? It's enormous. It's an amazing thing. Think about it. I would bet that most everybody in this room, including one, most of us say, "Well, I'll just go for reducing it. I'd like to reduce it quite a bit, because the other side of it is like amazing. That you're aspiring to end cognitive distortion and what would be called affective distortion. Cognitive distortion is ending the way this discriminating mind messes everything up, and the affective distortion would be this core delusion that we inherited in our DNA, like my dog Willie. That he was very clear that he was who he was, and so am I, and so are you. Letting that go is that is my aspiration, to let that go, and I am clear that I'm going to have to live till about 3,000 to pull it off. How am I doing? Am I finished? So I think, okay, I'm going to say two things, three things. I'm going to say four more things. Five things I'm going to say. Okay, I have 10 more things to say now. First of all, you've heard, I've said this, there's this guy named Musong. Now, what kind of a name is that? Musong, for God's sakes. He's a brilliant scholar at the Buddhist, Barry Center for Buddhist Studies. Brilliant scholar. He has written some amazing books. I don't know why he calls himself Musong. Why don't these people have English names? I just don't get it. So I've told you all this. It's one of my favorite lines of the past few months. He was well, first of all, it has been one of my favorite lines for decades. Jesus said, "You shall know the truth, and the truth will set you free." Right? I love that. I think that's really maybe the core truth of not just Christianity, but it's certainly the truth of Buddhism. You shall know the truth, and truth will set you free. I'm suggesting to you what the truth is that will set you free. In Buddhism, is pretty tough. But anyway, Musong was talking about. He said it's as Jesus said. He says it a little bit flippantly, maybe not. You shall know the truth, and the truth will set you free. And he says, but it will destroy you first. That's the problem. That's the problem of Buddhism. The truth will destroy your and my solidified, crystallized, distorted concept of who we are and who others are. That's why it's not easy to do this path. But it's so brilliant and so wonderful. So I wrote this in this book. This has a flaw on it. It's got a dot. So I'm selling this one for cheaper than the regular price. I'll give this to you for $4.98. I think that I wanted to read this. Wonder where it is. The third noble truth. Oh, well, now that's weird. I don't know why I did that. I had anyway. I'll just read this whole thing. It's a little bit long. Once at the Insight Meditation Society in Barre, I heard a Vipassana teacher share his experience of sitting in a Zen monastery in Korea. He told us that he approached a famous Zen master who was visiting the United States and asked him if he could come to Korea and be his student. I was really, at that time, it was a long, long time ago, and I think I was thinking, oh God, and maybe I'll do it too. He was a very good teacher. Anyway, the abbot said, of course, just be prepared to die. Well, I remembered that. Is that right? I wrote it down. So I said, earlier we said that our adult mind will need a little assistance if it is to proceed on this path. Your adult mind, the adult mind that is sitting here, is going to need a little help if we're going to really be considering this idea of being destroyed by the truth. That little assistance is a fragile presence, a quote-unquote feathered thing, in Emily Dickinson's lovely words. Our innate capacity to have faith in something mysterious extending beyond our ability to see through the eyes of reason. Faith resides only in the heart of a child, and it is the child within us who must take the adult by the hand, understanding, discernment, must unite with the child's heart of faith if we are to move into the unknown. One last element must be added as we remember the Zen teacher's invitation to come to Korea and die. There must be discernment combined with faith, but also there must be courage. You can't do this without courage.